put yourself in a position where you increase the chance of being successful. And then when you start to see that success repeated, it will start to add building blocks to your confidence.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sports of Business podcast. Today, I am joined with Alan Stein Jr. Welcome to the podcast, Alan.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Same here. So, Alan, you're a former NBA performance coach. You've worked with some of the greatest superstars, including Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and the late Kobe Bryant. Now you take the same principles and you apply them to business through keynote speaking, and you're also an author. So, great career. We'd love to dive into all these things on today's episode.
Yeah, this will be a lot of fun. I mean, as soon as I saw the sports to business title / moniker, I knew that we'd have a great conversation and have a lot of things in common.
Well, welcome to the show. So walk the viewers and the listeners on what are you doing today in the middle of this pandemic?
So I've really had to shift my business. My primary business model is that of a keynote speaker. So, prior to the pandemic, I would be on stages or in boardrooms 70 to 80 times a year, doing in-person speaking engagements. And, the pandemic, when everything shut down from an in-person standpoint, it just simply reminded me that speaking is what I do. It's not who I am. At my core, I am a coach. At my core, I am a teacher. At my core, I'm someone that likes to fill buckets and make emotional deposits in other people's lives. So when I realized that I couldn't do that through the traditional way that I was doing it before, through in-person speaking, I had to make some shifts and started to do everything remotely and virtually. So I've given more than my fair share of virtual presentations, which is not much different than the interaction you and I are having right now on this podcast. It's a lot of looking into a webcam and trying to find a way to connect with someone that's not actually in the room with you. And, it was a little bit of a learning curve at first, but I'd like to believe I'm getting better at it, which of course, anytime you put in purposeful repetitions, you'll get better at whatever it is you're doing.
That's awesome. I mean, you're already applying sports to business. I can't wait to dive further. One of the things, Alan, that people have been, talking about is before the pandemic, we were all in person. Now we have found a way to do it over Zoom. I think personally, coming from a sports background, you've worked in sports entire life. There's nothing that can really mimic the human interaction. What are your thoughts going forward after the pandemic is over? Are we ever going to get back to the human interaction? Because truth be told, I'm pretty sure you miss it, and I absolutely miss being in person.
Oh, I do as well. And yes, I have zero doubt that we will get back to doing things in person. In fact, I think that when collectively most of society feels it's safe and responsible and appropriate to get back, and of course, that's the big missing piece. We don't know if that will be this coming summer, if that won't be until 2020. We don't know the answer, but I am very resolute in the fact that whenever that is, people are going to be clamoring to get back in person, that they will have missed it. They'll have a newfound appreciation for it. There'll be an excitement for it. Sometimes in previous work, you get folks that kind of roll their eyes that they have to go to this conference, or, my team is having this meeting. And now I think they're going to change the have tos to the get tos. Yeah, we get to go. I can't wait to do it. So I'm excited about that opportunity. I do go into it knowing that, life before the pandemic and life after the pandemic will not be the same. And I'm not attached to the way things were before. So I understand that going into it, there might be some different nuances and some changes, and I'll have to be able to adapt to those things. And I'm fine with that. One of the most important principles that I pull from sport and use in business is the mindset that you just do the best you can with whatever you have, wherever you are. You don't complain, you don't make excuses, you don't blame anyone or anything. Do the best you can, and to your point, I would rather be in person on a stage sharing with groups. But if that's not possible, then the best I can do is do something via Zoom on a webcam, and I'm going to make the most of that opportunity. I'm not going to spend my time, angry that I can't be in person or blaming the pandemic. No, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have wherever I am. And if I can take that mindset in to when this pendulum swings back and we get back in person, I think it'll serve me well.
Well said. I think it's about being adaptable. And this is what great teams do at halftime. They make adjustments, right? Pandemic hit. I think you made your adjustments and you just got to do what you can, what you have. I think that's a very well way to put it.
Yeah, well, here's, and I like that you said that with halftime making adjustments. That is absolutely what the best coaches do, and what the best players do. There was a coach that I had worked for before that when our team was down at halftime, he would always kind of say with a smile and a wink, don't worry, guys, they just won the wrong half. And his point was, it doesn't matter who wins at halftime. All that matters is who wins at the end of the game. And we now realize, things that we can do better and things we can do to prevent them from playing as well as they are. We'll make those adjustments and we'll be fine. That's why they play two halves. And, for me, it's always a dance between preparation and the ability to adapt and be flexible. Excuse me. I'm a stickler for my due diligence and preparation. I believe that preparation is a sign of respect, that when you show up to an event fully prepared, you show that you respect your client, you show that you respect the audience, and most importantly, you show that you have a respect for yourself. So I make sure that I show up for every engagement as the best version of myself, prepared to deliver the best content that I'm capable of delivering. But with that preparation, you can't be too rigid and tied to the preparation. You also have to be adaptable and flexible so that you can, move as needed. That you might have prepared to go on this one track, and then you figure out that's not the best path. So I need to quickly pivot and move in a different direction. And to me, that's important. So I'm always prepared for every engagement, but I'm always ready to make changes and shifts anytime I need.
You remind me of a thing that our coach used to say on defense. He would say, preparation plus execution equals success. And our team went on to win the national championship on this premise that he's like, you can prepare all you want.
Yes.
If you guys don't go and execute based on what they throw at you, we're not going to win.
So well said. Absolutely.
And so I know, Alan, the way you're speaking, and it's been 10 minutes since we've been chatting. I know that you've had a career where you have a foundation, and the foundation that you built, your principles, your values have allowed you to do all these great things. So let's take a step back in memory lane. Walk me through when you grew up and how did you get all these values instilled in you that now you're actually teaching these businesses?
Well, my values were certainly instilled from my parents, and I'm incredibly grateful that I grew up in a two-parent household where both my mother and father were very present and very supportive of everything that I wanted to do. But I was involved in sports at a very early age, and I know that every single coach I've ever played for had an impact on me and had an influence in me. That's one of the reasons that I hold coaches in such high regard. Now, I certainly played for some coaches that probably weren't the best coaches in the world, but they still taught me something. If nothing else, they teach me how not to behave. Exactly. So, the fact that I have been coached by so many different people, especially as a young person, what was very valuable. And, for me, I fell in love with the game of basketball at 5 years old. The first time my parents signed me up for a recreation team, and here 40 years later in my mid 40s, basketball is still a major pillar in my life. And I say that because I am so grateful that I've been able to make a life and make a living around something that I'm very passionate about. And, while I'm not in the direct training space anymore, a good portion of the stories I tell and the lessons that I teach all stem from my time in basketball. So I still feel very connected to the sport, even though that's not what I'm doing at this moment. And, to answer your original question, I think the right seeds were planted when I was a child, as far as principles and values and right from wrong. But then that was reinforced every single year that I would play sports and play for a different coach and learn my trade. And then I really dove headfirst into the professional development and self-help space when I graduated college. So now I've had 20 years of reading, watching, and listening to just everything from every single person you can think of that has helped continue for me, to refine those values and those principles and those strategies that I live by.
How did you, after college, how do you get on this career of being a performance coach?
Well, part of my great fortune was simply my age. So at 45 years old, I graduated high school in 1994, graduated college in 1998, and I knew that I wanted to be a basketball strength and conditioning coach. But at the time, that was a really new industry. It was a really budding industry. No one else was really doing it. So there was not very much competition when I entered the workforce. And in fact, in the late 90s, less than a third of NBA teams even had a strength and conditioning consultant. So it's amazing to see how far that's come in the last 20 years. 25 years ago, teams barely had a consultant, and now every NBA team has an entire performance department. I mean, they have an entire staff of people that specialize in human performance and optimization. So it's amazing how far it's come. And I say that because I'm very thankful that when I got into the business, there was not very much competition. I could kind of, create my own path and swim in whatever direction I wanted. Many of the opportunities that I had in the early 2000s, if you tried to do those things today, there'd be a line all the way around the block with people that are trying to have those opportunities. So I'm very thankful that I got in at a good time. And I know that was, part of the reason for my initial success.
So first mover advantage, right? So, and I think it's always a hit or miss when some people try to do it or businesses try to do it, because you really don't know whether or not this market you're trying to enter is lucrative, right? What allowed you to really know, Alan, that if you're putting your eggs in one basket, if you're going to go all in into performance coaching, it's actually going to take you somewhere? How do you know how to be ahead of the market?
Well, what I think can be either it's both a blessing and a curse. So both of my parents were elementary educators. Both of my parents were teachers. My mom was a first grade teacher for 30 years. My dad was a teacher for the first half, and then the second half became a principal. So I grew up very middle class, very modest income as teachers. And that was really my frame of reference. So when I got into performance coaching, I wasn't even worried about the money. Like, I had no doubt that I could make the equivalent of what a teacher made, and that, I'd be able to live a happy and fulfilling life. So the money was never the driver for me. The driver was doing what I love to do, feeling like I was making an impact, being around the game that I love, pouring into people. So that's really what drove me. Now, the reason I say that that's a blessing and a curse is I've had to do some rewiring, once I started running my own training business, and, making a profit is actually the goal. And then going out into the corporate space, knowing your own value and not undervaluing yourself, and going and speaking to a group for peanuts when the message you have is worth much more than that. I've had to rewire that, because I come from kind of this altruistic space of coaching and teaching where money was never very important. And now I'm not saying that the reason I do what I do is for the money, but the money is a big portion of it. And the money is how I provide for my children and how I make sure that I'm financially free moving forward. So it's been an interesting journey. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've had to learn when I made the leap from sports to business, was that you have to know your worth and you have to charge your worth, and that what you share can have a huge financial impact on the businesses you work with, and you need to be appropriately compensated for that.
So you bring up I think there's a syndrome called imposter syndrome, right? And there are either, if you're in sports, I think, whether it's college or professional, or if you are in business, or if you are a keynote speaker such as yourself, how do you know not to put yourself in the syndrome? How do you know that, hey, my message is actually important? And how do you actually feel confident that, hey, I'm going to charge this because I'm going to deliver value?
A lot of it starts with just your self-narrative and your self-talk. And I will say, with full transparency, there have been several times in my career, both in basketball and in business, that I felt imposter syndrome, that you have some self-doubt and you ask yourself, like, why would someone listen to me? Why would someone read my book? Yeah. Why would someone pay me $20,000 for a keynote? And you have this hesitation and you have this doubt. And here's how I deal with it. First and foremost, I do the best I can not to judge myself. So when I find myself consciously thinking thoughts like that, I just take a step back and I take a deep breath, and I don't beat myself up for thinking those thoughts. Having some doubt and some hesitancy in your life is rather normal. The key is, what do you do with it? Do you lean into it and say, you know what? I do bring value. I do have a message that is worth hearing. I do have something I can share that is worth a company bringing me in. And you kind of have to, again, almost rewire your thinking so that you believe in your message. And, what's most important, especially as a speaker, is that I have confidence and that I believe in what it is that I'm sharing. Because if I don't have conviction and I don't have belief in what I'm sharing, you're certainly not going to have it sitting in the audience.
And I can see that if you don't have it. I think it's very transparent on the stage.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I give myself some grace and just say, look, almost everyone experiences some type of imposter syndrome to some degree at some point. So you're not abnormal for feeling that way. But here, let's actually cut to the truth, because imposter syndrome is really just a story that you're telling yourself. You're telling yourself that your message is not that good, or that someone should not value you, or who are you to write a book? That's just a story you're telling you. There's no truth behind that. There's only a truth behind it if you choose to accept that as truth. So anytime I catch myself with those feelings, I don't accept that as truth. I basically say, this is not true, that I have had some experiences and I have some lessons and strategies that I know are worth sharing. And I want to share because it's something that fills my bucket. And my goal is to pay this stuff forward to others. And in doing so, there is an inherent value in that. And people need to respect that value, and they need to invest in themselves and invest in their team if they want to hear that message. And, all of this is an ongoing process. I don't ever want to sound like I've got this thing figured out and that I've got this whole game on lock. Where I'm very proud is with all of the stuff we're discussing, I'm better with this stuff today than I was a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago. So I'm making progress. Perfection has never been my yardstick to measure myself because I'm far from perfect. So instead, I focus much more on making incremental, continuous progress than worrying about being perfect.
I think for everybody who's watching and listening to this episode, I think someone who's worked in the NBA with elite athletes, if you are saying that you're not perfect and you're making progress, I think that's a huge message everyone should take home and just, marinate on that. Because that is going to solve a lot of problems that I think a lot of leaders, young leaders, whether you're an athlete making transition, or whether you're in a corporate 500, Fortune 500 right now, trying to go up the ladder, this message right here, what you said, Alan, is going to drive huge value. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. No, I think it's important that we all exercise some level of humility and vulnerability to what we're doing. I have full confidence in the stuff that I teach, the stories I tell, the lessons that I share, the strategies that I implement. I know that stuff works because I've seen it work with myself and I've seen it work with the clients that I've worked with. But with that said, we are all under construction. None of us have this entire thing figured out. And I think it's important to bring that up because many times what most people project on social media or project out to the world is that they do have it all figured out and that their life is perfect. And that's simply not the case. One of the most important values to me is being grateful. I'm very grateful to have my health. I'm very grateful for the relationship I have with my children. I'm grateful for an opportunity to do something that I love. I'm getting better at my craft, so I'm pretty good at what I do. And I'm thankful for all of those things, but I'm not done yet. Don't put a fork in me yet. I'm not even close to getting to where it is that I want to be. And what I've learned to do over the last few years in particular is just love the journey and actually enjoy the work. Detach from outcomes. I'm not worried about reaching that, being that person. It's the pursuit of being that person that to me is where the real enjoyment and life is worth living in that space.
The joy in off-season training is the hard work. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the fun part.
Yeah. Walk me through, Alan. What was it like working with some of the biggest stars in the NBA?
What the neat part was, I have a very unique vantage point when it came to working with some of those players. Some of those guys I actually got to meet when they were teenagers, and I started working with them in high school. So I had an opportunity to meet and work with Kevin Durant and Markelle Fultz and Victor Oladipo and Quinn Cook and Jeremy Grant and Terrence Ross, a dozen or so players that are currently in the NBA. I met them when they were, just high schoolers. And I got to see kind of behind the curtains of what it takes to climb that mountain and become the best that you're capable of. And I really enjoyed that experience. Then that led to some work with Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball. And I got an opportunity to work events for Kobe Bryant and LeBron James and Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving and Steve Nash and Chris Paul. And I got to see those guys after they had already achieved, reaching the top of that mountain. So then I got to see from them what it takes to stay there and to continue to level up and to sustain your game. So I'm so thankful that, been able to have worked with a lot of really good players, that I've been able to see both. I've been able to see the before picture, and I've been able, to see the after picture. And that's really given me some tremendous insight that I share with businesses now.
What would be the biggest value or biggest principle that you see these guys had in let's say high school, that they've carried themselves or with themselves in the top of their game? What is a one driver that allows them to perform at the high level that businesses can learn?
The biggest that I've seen from these high performers, and it's the same for high performers in business, is being able to blend confidence with humility. So these guys have earned the right to be confident on the court because they've put in thousands of hours and thousands of repetitions during the unseen hours to earn the right to be confident. They've put in the work that they say, hey, when the game is on the line, I deserve to make this winning shot because I've put in the work. So they're very confident on the court, but they blend that with a humility and a coachability that says, as good as I am, I can still get better. I might be the best player on my team or the best player in the league or the best player in the NBA, but I'm not as good as I'm capable of getting, so I can still get better. So they have the humility to say, I'm good, but I can be better. And being open to that type of coaching is what allows them to keep leveling up. So I think the most successful people in any area of life have earned the right to be confident, and you can tell it in everything that they do, but they still have a humility that says, I'm not done yet, and I still have more to learn.
How would you coach someone that is just on the cusp of greatness, right? Let's say you're going back to high school and some of these guys are great talent. They can go and become the best. What will your advice be to someone, let's say in business today, that knows that they are CEO level material, but they're just not confident right now? Well, how can they get on the journey?
Well, it all has to deal with mindset. And a good portion of mindset are the stories you tell yourself, your self narrative, your self talk. How do you talk to yourself when no one else is watching? I think I could make a pretty compelling argument that the things we say to ourselves are the most important things we'll ever say. So part of that goes into confidence. Confidence comes from two things. It comes from demonstrated performance. So it comes from knowing that you can do this. When Steph Curry steps on the free throw line to make a game-winning free throw, he has the confidence he'll make it because he's taken that shot at this point in his career probably millions of times. So he knows that he can do it. There's no guesswork. So that's part of it. And then the other part comes from that self-talk. Are you constantly telling yourself that you are good enough and you are worthy and you deserve the right to be successful and happy? Or are you telling yourself the exact opposite?
Mm-hmm.
And some of this self-talk is done consciously, and a good portion of it is done subconsciously. And that's why sometimes we have to work to rewire our hard drives to make sure that we're not doing things that are sabotaging our performance. But when it comes to confidence, especially if you said there's a business high performer that is lacking some confidence, there's a variety of approaches. One, you can take a look back and revisit many of the things they've done where they've been successful and they've earned the right to be confident. Because many times high performers, they're so critical of themselves and they are their own biggest critics that they focus on the 1 or 2% that needs to get better instead of taking a step back and saying, well, 98% has been pretty good. So some of it is being able to offer that different vantage point and then teaching them how to have more positive self-talk. And then lastly, put them in some positions where they can be successful. Exactly. In basketball, as a point guard, you need to know where every one of your teammates, where they score the ball at the highest percentage. If you've got a 7-footer that's used to playing with their back to the basket, giving them the ball outside of the 3-point line on the wing, you're not really giving them the ball in a place where they can be most successful. Yeah. So you've just lessened the occurrence or the chance that they're going to be successful. So if you're a good point guard, you'll get them down on the block and you'll give them to the ball in the post where they have a better chance of being successful. And it's the same thing with any of us. Put yourself in a position where you increase the chance of being successful. And then when you start to see that success repeated, it will start to add building blocks to your confidence.
As a leader of a business, let's say that you have a team now, if you want to reverse this principle, right? How important is it for leaders to understand their team at an individual level, to know who is the person with 7 foot versus somebody who loves taking the 3-pointer?
Oh, it's vital. I mean, that's why, in business, being able to get to know your people on a human level
Hmm.
is one of the most important traits of an effective leader. Getting to make sure that they know that Alan values me as a human being first and as an employee second, that he cares about me and my dreams and my goals and my wants and my needs. He's taken the time to get to know me and my personality and my family, because when you do that, you create a connection and you build trust. And when you build that connection first, then it makes the leading so much easier. Now, one of the hard parts to that is when it's time to scale. That is much easier done if you have a team of 10 people than if you have a team of 10,000. But that's why you have to have systems and structures in place that if you have 10,000 people, obviously the CEO is not going to get to know every person on a personal level, but you should have a structure and an org chart that says, hey, we've got managers and supervisors and directors and regional coordinators. Someone on our team is going to get to know you on a very personal level and know what makes you tick. And being able to create that kind of hierarchy so that everybody on the team, even if there's 10,000 of you, everyone on the team feels heard, feels valued, feels respected, feels included, feels appreciated. And that's what's most important. If person 10,000 feels like person 10,000, then you're not going to get the most out of them and your team's not going to be as successful as you're capable of.
It's also important, I think, at the CEO level, whether you're a big business or a small business, that the values that you have at that level are also distilled in each individual employee that you're hiring. And then their job needs to be that they do the same thing, because you can hire for a skill, but if you don't hire for the potential or the character that you're trying to get, the values, I think what you're saying is not going to happen, right? You're not going to be able to get
Absolutely.
the human value. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, without question. And it's a conscious decision to say we're going to put people first, and that is one of our core beliefs and our values. And we are going to value the human beings that have decided to become a part of something bigger than themselves. And please know, with all of this stuff that I'm sharing, most of these are incredibly basic principles, but none of this stuff is easy. Please don't think that I think for 1 second that leading a group of 10,000 people is easy to do, because it's not. I mean, that is fraught with all sorts of different challenges. But if you stick to the basics and the fundamentals and say, all right, how can we make sure that all 10,000 people feel valued and appreciated and respected and included? We put these systems in place, and then we hold each other accountable to these standards of excellence and, to these values and core beliefs we have. That's really the only shot you got.
The question I love to ask, and it's actually a derivative of this topic, Alan. I always ask this, and I think you're the perfect person to answer this question, is within your experience, how important is it to build a superstar team versus a team of superstars that can't perform? I'm sure you've seen this a ton in the NBA level.
Ultimately, it kind of goes back to, do you want the 5 best players, or do you want the 5 players that play the best together? And my answer is always going to be, I want the 5 players that can play the best together. And, and in order to do that, there has to be some role clarity. Folks have to know what it is that they do well, what makes them unique, what's their superpower, if you will. And then they have to be put in a position where they can exercise that to the best of their ability. And everybody needs to respect everyone else's role on the team. If we keep using basketball as our analogy, if you have 5 guys that want to shoot the ball every time they touch it, that's going to be hard to get them to play as a cohesive unit. But when you have someone that takes pride in being a facilitator, and you have someone that takes pride in setting great screens, and you have someone that takes pride, like now everyone can kind of work together and do what it is that makes them strong. So talent will always be important. I never want to downplay talent, but just having raw talent, if you have an inability to work with others and collaborate, and you have an inability to stay in your lane and do your role, then you're probably not the best person to play, on that team.
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the coaches who build a team around the players, or they get the players to fit a system. I think it all depends on perhaps what your company is like, or what your direction is, a 3-year plan, 5-year plan, whatever that is. And I think you have to hire based on how will the players fit that system, versus just trying to get the best talent you can find because you have a bunch of money that you want to go and spend, right?
And in business, a lot of that comes down to culture. So you need to decide, what are our core beliefs? What is our mission and our vision? What are our values? What are the standards of excellence that we want to be about and what we want to represent? These are non-negotiables. Now we need to do the best we can to attract top talent that want to be a part of this, that want to live up to these values and have these same beliefs and want to live up to these standards of excellence. So that's who we need to attract. And then that needs to be part of the hiring and interviewing process, is making sure that the person is a culture fit, not just a fit on resume, not just passing the eyeball test and say, well, wow, they were great at their job for 20 years. Yes, those things are important, but only if they're a culture fit as well. And when you can get all of the stars aligned, and then you bring the right people on board and you get them in the right seat on the bus, and then you pour into their development and their training so that you're continuing to pour into them so that they grow with you and the company, then you've got something special. And the groups that do that the best have very low attrition. Their people don't want to leave. And when their people leave, it's usually because they've matriculated to the point where they want to take an opportunity that they just simply can't pass up. And that's actually a feather in your cap to be able to say, hey, we helped groom and train this person to the point where now they're going to go off and spread their own wings. To me, when I look at the NBA and the college coaching trees, that's one of the things that I look at for an elite level coach, is how many other elite level coaches have you mentored or produced? How many other coaches that were your assistant before have now gone on to be head coaches because you've empowered them and helped them do so? To me, that speaks volumes.
I think the biggest thing a leader in business can do for his or her team is say that my main job here is to make sure that I improve you professionally and I give you the best chance of getting promoted or going somewhere else where you're going to be doing something that is a high responsibility. That should be the first goal of any leader in a business versus money or profits. Because if you focus on the people, that stuff will take care of itself.
Absolutely. That's an old Bill Walsh saying. The former coach of the San Francisco 49ers just said the score will take care of itself. And I'm a huge believer in that. It really comes down to process versus outcome. There's nothing wrong with having outcome goals. There's nothing wrong with having a North Star. If you're a business, there's nothing wrong with having sales goals or quotas that you want to reach. But that's really all it is. That's just the end result. That's the end address that you punch into the GPS. The real work is the process. What do we need to do today that gets us a little bit closer to that goal? How do we need to behave on a consistent basis that gets us closer to that goal? And no longer need external validation for your own self-worth or for how well your business is doing just by looking at those metrics. Those metrics are only one component that you need to look at. You need to look at the process, and you need to look at, is everybody doing what they need to do to contribute to get us closer? And when you put your people first, usually the score will take care of itself.
That's awesome. So one thing I wanted to go back on, Alan, you mentioned was that sometimes we sabotage ourselves, right, by saying negative things. How real do you think it is of a problem where if you're telling yourself something negative, that it actually has a detrimental effect? There's something called don't be overconfident. But how do you know that what you're saying right now is actually negatively impacting you?
Well, I think what's most important on a conscious level, and we have to remember there is the conscious and then there's the subconscious. And on a conscious level, we just have to be very real with ourselves. See, another thing to think about, and we've seen this a lot during this pandemic, is what's called toxic positivity, which is just this charade of pretending to be positive and almost forcing yourself to be positive when you don't feel very positive. And I'm not a huge fan of that. I mean, I'm naturally wired to be fairly optimistic and a pretty positive guy. I mean, I've been a glasses half full guy for my entire life. So some of that is in my genetic coding. But I'm also able to take a step back and be real with myself, and can look at a situation and that maybe I didn't get the result that I wanted, take a step back and go, okay, you didn't get what you wanted, or didn't get the result that you had been hoping for. Let's unpack this and figure out why. What is something that I could have done differently? And I don't view that as being negative. I view that as being real and being able to say, okay, here's some things that I could have done differently. So I want to learn from that. So you just have to walk a fine line between beating yourself up and compounding a mistake and being very real and honest with yourself. The ability to move to the next play is really the definition of resilience. And again, if we use basketball as the example, because that's kind of the through line with us, if you miss a wide open layup, once you've missed that shot, I mean, really you have two choices. You can sprint back on defense as hard as you can and try to earn the possession back, or you can put your head down and pout and jog back on defense and get stuck in your feelings because you missed the wide open layup. The choice is yours. Now some of that will be the subconscious wiring of previous experiences. If you're used to having bad body language and poor facial expressions when things don't go your way, then it's harder to make the conscious choice not to do that, but you still have that choice. And to me, that's how I try to view everything. So I try to detach from the outcome. I give everything my best effort and have the best attitude. And then wherever the chips fall, then I take a step back and I evaluate that and say, okay, if things went well, why did they go well? Well, I'll do more of that. If things didn't go well, why didn't they go well? Maybe I need to tweak or do less of that. It's an ongoing process. And anytime you marry yourself to the outcome or the result, you're giving your power away. If you're only happy when you win, you're going to have a pretty miserable life because you're going to lose plenty of times in this world. That's no different than saying, I'm only going to be happy when it's sunny out. Well, depending on where you live, there's going to be a whole handful of days where you're probably going to be miserable. And we don't want to be dependent on the external world for how we look at ourselves and our own happiness and fulfillment. To me, that would be foolish.
Well, that's well said, Alan. And also, I think it goes back to, after a game, you get in the film room, you just take a step back and you watch film.
Yeah.
What do we do well? What do we not do well? What can we improve on? And let's just keep going, right?
Yeah. I know the comparison and the analogy of using a GPS is a little bit overplayed and cliche, but there's some real truth behind it. And there's two things that I think are important when we think of GPS. One, the only thing a GPS needs to know are two pieces of information. It needs to know where you are right now, and it needs to know where you're trying to go. Those are the only two pieces of information that it needs. It doesn't need anything else. It's completely sterile. It's completely unbiased. Your GPS doesn't need to know if you're happy or sad. Your GPS doesn't need to know where you were yesterday. All it needs to know is where you are at this moment. And I think there's some value in looking at life through that lens. But the other part that I think is so important is if you're following GPS and you miss a turn or you take the wrong turn, it simply reroutes. It doesn't call you an idiot. It doesn't get upset. It doesn't turn itself off. It just basically says, okay, reroute. And it's, I mean, almost to a monotone, sterile level that it just says, okay, you were supposed to turn right. You didn't. So let's figure out another path. And then if you make another boneheaded mistake and you miss another turn, it just reroutes. Mm-hmm. That thing will reroute over and over and over until you get where you're trying to go. And it doesn't judge you. It doesn't call you names. Like I said, it doesn't shut off. And we need to learn how to be that way with ourselves. And this doesn't mean that we need to mask emotion or not feel emotion. But when we make a mistake, just reroute. Figure out what you did wrong. Find a way to course correct. Don't beat yourself up and compound it by making it worse. And just keep trying that progress of moving forward.
It's a great example. That's awesome. Ellen, last question, or more of advice from you for all the business owners, executives right now that are trying to get through the pandemic, and their plans and all of the strategies that they have been turned around upside down for the past 12 months. Advice that you would give these executives, an analogy perhaps from basketball to them right now, and how they can continue making progress and come out stronger on the other side.
what most people are dealing with right now, in addition to just the sheer adversity of it, is a very high level of uncertainty, that we don't know exactly when things will go back to normal, and we don't know what the new normal will even look like. And that uncertainty certainly heightens anxiety and causes some folks to worry. And to me, the best remedy for uncertainty is focusing on the present moment, focusing on what's right in front of you, and focusing on what you can control. You know, there's an acronym WIN, WIN, that stands for what's important now. And I think that's the most important question that folks in the business world should be asking themselves every day. You know, don't worry about the last 10 months, as tough as they've been, and don't worry about what the next 10 months are going to look like. Yes, you need to look back and learn. And yes, you need to look forward to prepare, but you don't need to live in either one of those areas. Focus on today. What's important now? What is the one or two things that I can do today that will help inch our business forward? That will, you know, is it building a better relationship with someone on the team? Is it some strategic planning? You know, whatever it may be, but figure out what's most important now to the business, and then put your focus on that. When we're in the present moment, we drastically reduce anxiety. We drastically reduce depression and, over scrutinization of things that have been going on. So just learn to focus in the present moment to the best of your ability. Just know that when you do get distracted and you wander out of the present moment, that's completely normal and understandable. So give yourself some compassion, but just focus on today.
Awesome. Well, Alan, educational and inspirational at the same time. Thanks so much for jumping on. Where can everyone find you, learn more about you, and follow you?
Oh, my pleasure. Well, I have two different websites. I have alansteinjr.com and I have strongerteam.com. And I'm also very accessible on social media. Feel free to hit me up on Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook at Alan Stein Jr. And I have a book called Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets and the Best of the Best that you can easily find on Amazon or Audible if you'd rather listen to it. And if anyone's interested in investing in a team order for your entire organization, they can just email me, alan@alansteinjr.com, and I can give them a great discount on signed books.
Awesome. Everyone, you heard it. Follow Alan and order his book. Thanks so much, Alan, for jumping on. It was a pleasure having you on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Team, remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend, and visit tanveervango.com for a ton of free content and exercises.